All right, everyone. Hello and good morning. Again, welcome and thank you so much for taking time to attend our ACT strategy session. This is the fourth session, I believe, in our MCPS summer workshops. So I am quite certain that some of you may already know who I am. I'm going to give you a brief introduction in case you have not had the opportunity to connect with me. I am Nacy Veach and I work for the Princeton Review. I am the local partnership specialist, and I work personally with your college and career counselors, as well as parent organizations within your school district. I am here to offer free resources to you and your families, as well as any paid resources that you may want to discuss as it pertains to test prep, academics, or college admissions. I've worked in education now for almost 2 decades. And so my hope today is to bring you a wealth of knowledge and give you some time to ask questions at the end of the session, should you have any. Let's go ahead and jump right into our agenda for today. On the agenda, first, we're going to talk about what is the ACT. So we'll break down what this test is and why it is so important in college admissions. Now, we're also going to discuss briefly what test optional means and whether or not you should submit your scores to colleges and universities. Next, we're going to focus on the essential things that you need to know about taking tests. And these things are going to help you on tests such, of course, as the ACT, as well as other tests like the SAT and the PSAT. And then the last thing we'll do is we'll tackle some ACT specific strategies that are going to help you on test day. Now, again, my goal is that you'll take away some strategies by the end of the session and a better understanding of how you can maximize your score on the ACT. All right, so we're going to start with the basics here. And our first idea is, what is the ACT? Now, I'm not going to ask you all to answer because I have a general idea that you probably already know what this is. But just to give you a bit of background, the history of the ACT goes way back to 1959 in Iowa, when an educator named Everett Lindquist sought to create a competitor for the SAT. So he called his company the American College Testing Company, and created the American College Testing Exam. Now, over time, and with many changes to this exam's format and structure, the name was also dropped. So while ACT might not be an acronym for anything, it certainly does still stand for something in the college admissions process. And it stands for one of the two main exams that students take as part of their college admissions. All right, in this new test optional world, we often get asked, do SAT and ACT scores still matter? Now, if you attended our Dream Colleges session last week, this is going to serve as a little bit of a review for you. But the bottom line here is that 93% of schools are still going to want to see high school test scores if they are submitted. So college admissions officers would obviously rather see you get a 34 on the ACT versus 25, right? Which is why super scoring exists. Now, super scoring uses the highest individual section scores for students from different test dates added together to give you a higher overall score. Now, that's a positive for students since it allows colleges to report higher average test scores. So just to kind of sum this up, test optional and test flexible policies will allow students to not only submit their strong test scores, but give colleges a piece of information and added information for their application. So, however, we do need to ask, do these scores still matter? Well, the reason we have to ask is because if SAT and ACT scores still exist, what that means is the overwhelming majority of colleges have adopted this test optional or even test blind policy in college admissions. So during the COVID pandemic, you want to keep in mind that a lot of these policies have changed and they will continue to change year after year. So if you're a freshman or a sophomore, you want to keep in mind that as the years go on, you want to check with the colleges and universities that you're looking to be admitted to and figure out if they're what their testing policy is so that you can act appropriately when it comes to submitting your SAT or ACT scores. Bear with me for just 1 second. I'm letting a few folks in. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on. We're going to talk about what does the ACT measure. So if we were in person together, I would have you guys just raise your hand and answer these questions. But for the sake of time and our virtual world, I'm just going to kind of go through them and talk about, do colleges, college admission tests like the SAT measure your intelligence? So you don't have to put it in the chat, but I want you to think about that for a second. Do these tests, are they a measure of how smart you are? The answer to that is no. They are not an indication of how smart you are, but rather what you know from the information that's on this test. Secondly, does the ACT, this also applies to the SAT, does it reflect your high school GPA? The answer to this one is also no, false. Just because you do well in high school doesn't mean you're going to do well in the ACT and vice versa. Do tests like the ACT predict your college GPA? This one, no surprise, is also false. Just because you do well in a test like the ACT does not mean that you are necessarily going to do well and perform well in college. On the other hand, if you are struggling with tests like the ACT, it's not an indicator that you are going to fail when you get into college. And then the last one is a bit more tricky. Do tests like the ACT measure or test what you have learned in high school? Well, this one doesn't necessarily have a definitive answer. Now, obviously, you're going to see some skills and things that you learned in middle school and high school, like the Pythagorean theorem, for example. You're probably going to see that on the test like the ACT, but it measures more than just the content that you have learned in school. And this is why many students who are good students, who have a strong GPA, you're in higher level classes, but for some reason you just seem to struggle with standardized tests. This is normal, and it is because that standardized tests are completely different from your high school tests. So I just want to do a quick comparison between high school exams and standardized tests. Keep in mind that high school tests are going to cover limited subject matter. So you're likely going to be tested on maybe one chapter or one specific skill out of your class, while standardized tests are going to cover potentially years of material. Many students may see skills on the ACT that they've seen way back in, that they learned back in middle school. High school tests simply assess your content knowledge. Do you know the content or do you not? Tests like the ACT, standardized tests in general, are a mixture of content knowledge as well as testing strategy. So if you don't have the strategy, it's going to make those exams much more difficult for you. Next, high school tests will oftentimes give you plenty of time. You may have an entire class period to complete one small exam. However, standardized tests like the ACT are going to be rigorously timed. Once you've moved forward from a section, you do not have the option of moving back. Next, high school tests allow partial credit or extra credit. Standardized tests, your answers are simply right or wrong. High school tests are human graded. So you have a teacher who is doing that, which is why you're getting potentially that partial credit, let's say on a math question. However, standardized tests are either machine graded or computer graded, so you do not have that option. And then lastly, high school tests are one element of your overall grade. But with standardized tests, only your final score matters. Now, all of this to say that if you are the type of student who is struggling with tests like the SAT and the ACT, even though you're a good student, this is perfectly normal and perfectly okay. You just need to figure out some strategies that are going to help you ace these types of exams. Okay, moving forward, I want to take a look at the ACT section by section. I do want to note here that the essay is optional, okay? You will not necessarily be sitting for this long. However, the essay section that you may see at the bottom here is fairly straightforward, and it's another way to kind of separate yourself from other students who are taking the test. Now, keep in mind that many schools do not want to see the essay on the ACT, so this is something that you may or may not elect to do. But just to give you a general breakdown of what the ACT looks like section by section, you are going to have 4 sections on this exam. So it will be comprised of English, math, reading and science. So with the essay, if you choose to do it, you're looking at a total of 215 minutes, and then you'll be answering a total of 216 questions. All right, let's take a look at I almost said SAT, excuse me, at the ACT scoring model. Now, for each section, you're going to receive a raw score, which is essentially just a tally of how many questions that you got correct. Now, that is then converted into what we call a scaled section score. Now, this isn't always a straightforward process, partly because of the odd scale that the ACT uses for scoring. So on the English section, you're going to receive a score between a 1 and a 36. On the math section, you're going to receive a score between a 1 and 36. Okay, no surprise here, reading and science also, all of the scoring models are going to give you a score range between a 1 and a 36. And then the composite score also is going to give you a score between a 1 and 36. Now, this score, this composite, is simply just an average of your 4 section scores. Now, the ACT composite being an average can work to your advantage, because if you aren't as strong on one specific section, but you score better in other sections, it's not going to allow your composite to suffer quite as much. All right, so I'm going to ask for a little participation from you guys. So that's going to bring me to this next question. What is a good score? What do you personally think on the ACT is a good score? Now, remember, it ranges from a 1 to 36. So if you think you know what a good score would be considered for the ACT, pop it in the chat for me. Does anybody have a guess? While we're waiting for guesses, I'm going to read a question that we got. Will colleges only see the average scores or the breakdowns? So when colleges and universities receive your ACT score, they are going to see every section score, and then they're going to see the composite score as well. Keep in mind, if you submit more than one ACT, some schools will super score those. So they'll take your highest English, your highest science, and they'll add those together to create your own super score composite. So yes, they will see the section scores as well as your composite score. All right, we have a couple folks in the chat who have answered. What is a good score? One student says it depends on where you are applying. We also have another student who says a 33 or above would be considered a strong score. All right, well, both of you are right. And the reason why is that a good score is a score that is going to help you get into your dream college. Now, many students are pushing for that next level, which might even just look like 1 extra point on the ACT. And you need to find the score that helps you in the admission process for the schools that you apply to. So for some students, this could look like a 26. For other students, you might need something more like a 32. But it's not just about the number. You have to identify the colleges that you want to go to, see what their average or their median, rather, ACT scores are, so that when you focus on your test prep, you have a number and you can aim for that specific score. All right. Let's go ahead and move forward. I don't see anything else in the chat as far as questions, so I'm going to just keep chugging along, and this is going to take us to our second idea, which is test taking essentials. So before we really get into what you're going to be facing with the ACT, we need to talk about some strategies that will apply to standardized tests in general. Now, these are going to apply to the ACT, but they will also help you on the SAT, the PSAT, or potentially even IB or AP exams. And to take that even a step further, if you go to graduate school, tests like the GRE and the GMAT, these standardized strategies will apply to those as well. Now, and since the ACT is a standardized test, we want to begin with a big picture viewpoint of the exam and discuss the strategies that are going to apply. All right, so this is one of the biggest similarities. We're gonna look at the SAT and ACT, and we're gonna kind of group them together first. Excuse me. Let's just talk about first and foremost, when we talk about strategy, the first strategy is understanding what to expect when you sit and take these exams. And so both the SAT and the ACT are going to be similar in this regard. Be prepared on testing day to know that regardless of the tests you take, you are going to attend and take the test at a testing site. Now, keep in mind, for the majority of you for the ACT, you are going to have to go to ACT online, and you will register for that specific exam date. Now, this could happen at your local high school. It could be at a nearby high school or just a nearby testing facility. So you'll be given the option of where you want to take that exam. Some ACTs are offered during the school day. For the most part, the ACT isn't as popular in Montgomery County, so most likely you're not going to have an in-school testing day for the ACT. But both the SAT and ACT are going to be proctored live. So what that means is a person is going to be in the room with you while you take your test, just to make sure that everything is going smoothly. Now, again, in the terms of preparedness, right? A good strategy, again, being prepared, you need to understand what the ACT is going to require you to do. So firstly, the ACT is going to ask you to analyze reading passages. On the ACT, the reading section has 4 lengthy passages, with each passage containing 10 questions asking you about various aspects of those passages. Now, on the new digital SAT, each question is going to have its own short passage, but that will be a discussion for a different day. Now, tests like the ACT are going to ask you to edit and revise writing. So again, the ACT has lengthy passages, right, with a series of questions, but you're going to be prepared to both edit and revise those writings. And then lastly, you will also be required to solve high school math problems on both tests, the SAT and the ACT. You will be able to use a calculator for the entirety of the ACT. This is going to cover some geometry. It's going to cover some algebra, and then you're going to get just a little sprinkling of trigonometry questions, but nothing past that. And then lastly, both tests, even the SAT is going to ask you to or require you to analyze scientific data. Now, the ACT has a dedicated science section that, again, is devoted entirely to these types of questions. But of course, the SAT, you're going to see that spread throughout the reading and writing sections. All right, jumping into more strategy. Here's a question that you would probably never ask yourself about a high school math test, but a question that you should ask yourself when it comes to approaching the ACT. How many questions should you solve on the ACT math section? Now, there seems to be one very obvious answer to this question. You answer all of them, right? You solve them all. So if there are 60 questions, you should attempt to try and answer all 60 questions. Now, we're going to call this the Hare approach. So you see 60 questions, you dive right in, you do them as quickly as possible. You must also have to do them in 60 minutes, which is going to give you an average of about a minute per question. This is not going to be very long, though. Keep in mind that some of these questions on the ACT are going to have higher level math, or they're going to contain multiple steps that are going to take you a lot of time. Now, for the average math student, that's going to give you about 29 out of 60 correct answers, which is going to look like a 19 math score on the ACT. Now, why might a student only get 29 of them correct? Well, because they're going through the test like the hare. They're going to rush, hurry through the questions, and then they're likely going to make mistakes. Our first instinct as humans tends to be the hare approach, which is getting through every single question that we can as quickly as possible just to get through the test. However, this is not always the best way to approach the ACT math section. We want you not to be like the hare. We want you to approach it more like the tortoise. Now, the tortoise and the hare is a lesson that's or a fable that is well known from elementary school, but it displays the fact that the tortoise is focused, keeps to doing what it does best, and ends up beating the much faster hare in the race. So how would a tortoise answer the questions? How many questions did you solve on the math ACT question section? The tortoise is going to say, pick your best questions. Now, the ACT is designed to make you run out of time, to stress out, and to struggle to do your best on every single question. So you're going to pick your best questions, which is the ones that you know that you can fully do the math and can confidently tackle. Now, maybe that's going to look like just 45 out of those 60 questions across the math sections. But then that's going to give you, as opposed to 1 minute, it's going to give you roughly a minute and 20 seconds per question. And then you'll be able to slow down just a little bit. Also, on the other hand, if you're not stressing yourself out and you're not wasting mental energy on the concepts, then you're going to be less prepared for the questions that you know will take you way too long to solve. Now, for that same average math student who got a 19 on the ACT math in the last example using the hare approach, this could now result in 35 correct answers and something that looks more like a 24 on the ACT math section. So the exact same student taking a different strategy or approach could gain as many as 5 points on the math section. So just by slowing down, taking a breath, and picking your best questions first, you can gain a significant score increase. And then keep in mind, at the end of the day, not only have you already maximized your points, but you can still also guess on any unanswered questions to help improve your score. Okay, question in the chat: do all questions have the same weight? As far as we know, roughly there is a formula that's used by ACT, but for the most part, I would say the answer to that is yes. Do students see all questions for a section or only one by one? So the ACT as it stands now is a paper pencil test. It will be going digital, or it'll be going online, as they say, which is a conversation that we'll have when we get more information. But if you were to sit now for the ACT, you will have paper, pencil, and Scantron, which means that you would be able to look at all questions within a section at your own discretion. So you'll be able to move back and forth through those questions. All right, continuing our conversation on guessing to improve your score. Next up is a strategy that we call letter of the day here at the Princeton Review. Now, the bottom line is a blank answer is a wrong answer on the ACT, which means that you should never leave an answer choice blank. So even if you're making a completely random guess, you need to make sure that you're putting something in the bubble. Now, you'll be a much more successful student if you know how to guess the smart way. Now, I want to show you two approaches to making random guesses. Students often waste time by trying to guess correctly, even if they have absolutely no idea what the question is asking, and even if they don't have time to complete every question. So here is a simple solution that is going to help make this easier. Okay, so first, which of these examples do you think is going to give you a higher possible score? If you were to guess straight up and down the same answer, or if you were to mix it up and make a pattern or design? How many of you? Okay, so we already had somebody answer in the chat. Good. So if you think you know, answer. We have two people say they think that the left would score more points. Does anyone want to contest that? All right, so we have 3 votes for left. Same. All right, you guys are pretty smart. It is actually the first column on the left. So it may not work out well with just 10 questions, but over hundreds of questions, you would absolutely, without a doubt, score more points by using what we call letter of the day. So when you sit down for the ACT, you're going to pick a letter before the test. Now you'll have 4 possible choices on the English and reading section. So you'll pick A, B, C, or D. The math section has 5 choices, so A, B, C, D, or E. It does not matter which letter you pick. One letter is not going to do better than another. We always heard that C was the most popular answer choice, and that is just absolutely not true. So you pick your letter of the day and you stick with it. So if you do happen to run out of time on any of those sections, you will just fill the bubbles in using that letter. So statistically speaking, if you were to have 4 answer choices, you would have a 25% chance of getting every answer correct and would therefore maximize your points on average. All right, just checking the chat here. All right, perfect. All right, so moving forward, that's pretty straightforward. The next one is also going to be a very elementary concept, but I would do you a disservice by not talking about it because it is so critically important. And it is also something that some people forget about when they sit down to take tests like the ACT. Now, you've probably heard this term process of elimination way back in elementary school, but I just want to highlight an example of why it is so useful. Now, without our phones, without Google, if I were to ask you who is the 13th president of the United States, there might be a couple of you out there who could get that answer if you're a major history buff, but by and large, I would guarantee you that without your answer choices, you would not be able to answer this question. Now, if I were to give you the multiple choice questions like you'll get on the ACT, then you will be able to then eliminate answers that you know do not make sense. So I'm going to spare you all the details here, but we already know that George Washington was number 1, first president. We know that Joe Biden is our current president of the United States. And then we know that Ronald Reagan is definitely not 13 because there are 40-something presidents, right? And Ronald Reagan is a more recent one. So through process of elimination, we have our answer here, which is going to be B, Millard Fillmore. So again, an elementary concept in this example, but on more difficult concepts, you can still use this same strategy to eliminate unnecessary answer choices and improve your chance of getting a score that is higher. All right, moving forward, this is a list of common mistakes that we see students at the Princeton Review make that can hinder your score and your progress on tests like the ACT. Now, I'm just going to quickly go through these. A common mistake that we often see is that students answer questions too quickly. Just like in the previous examples, you don't think about it, you just answer the question and therefore get it wrong. Secondly, what if you choose answers too carelessly? So if you fail to notice the difference between a colon or a semicolon in the grammar section, you might know the grammar rules, but you're just missing an important detail. 3, doing work in your head. This particularly pertains to the math section. You're able to use a calculator, but if you're rushing, you may try to do that work in your head and therefore miss or make a computational error. Misreading a problem. So you can misread the problem. So if you're reading quickly, you see increase instead of decrease, or you forget to read carefully enough to see the word not in a question, that could cause you to get the answer wrong as well. And then lastly, you can just also not understand what to do. It's not that you don't know a formula or a grammar rule, but specifically that you just don't understand the task that the question is requiring you to do. So these are all reasons that it is so difficult for students to get a perfect score. And it is also why this test is something that you should prep for rather than just study for. I want you to think of the ACT more like getting ready for a marathon or a music recital. And at the Prince Review, we focus heavily on repetition and drills for a reason. And that is because you really need to make sure that you have thoroughly prepared in order to avoid these mistakes. All right, we do have a question before I move forward. Question is, are there accommodations for students with an IEP that would apply to reading students with dyslexia? So just like the SAT and College Board, ACT does allow extended time and other types of accommodations on the exam. You would want to chat with your school counselor about this, because you do have to go through a process of applying for an accommodation to be approved for these accommodations on the official ACT. So yes, they do exist. Excuse me. Okay. All right. So this is going to take us to our very last section, which is going to be some test specific strategies. Now, I'm going to share a few strategies with you that are specifically going to work on the ACT. Now, there's obviously not enough time for me to cover everything that you're going to need to know because we only have a few minutes together. But we will go over a few strategies, though, that you can use right away if you are prepping for the ACT. Now, each of these sample questions that I'm going to go over with you comes directly from our ACT practice tests. And you can register for the ACT practice test through our MCPS summer workshop program, and I'll give you more information about that at the end of the session. All right, we're going to look at, just like I said, a few examples here. Now, first, we're going to start with English strategy. This is a very typical ACT English question. And remember, your task on the ACT English section is going to be to improve the grammar and the mechanics of a pre-written passage. Keep in mind, this passage is going to be poorly written, and your job is just going to be to figure out how to improve it. Now, each underlined portion is going to have an accompanying question, but you also need to consider the context that is written around the underlined portion. And this can all get very confusing when you're sitting for an exam, so you should look and focus on what is changing in the answer choices. Okay, so comparing the answer choices here is going to reveal that pronouns are being tested. Specifically, we're going to look at the number changes in the pronouns because it's going between singular and plural. So a good strategy here in this question, if you've read it, is to mark which answers are singular and which answers are plural. So let's read the question. These fudge shops are so numerous and abundant that the local residents have even developed a special nickname for these tourists. I call the tourist fudgies. All right, so you can even mark these as S and P or 1 and 2, but let's look at the pronouns and check them against the noun that is calling the tourist fudgies, okay, which in this case is going to be the residents. All right, so what we see here is a plural noun, Okay, so choices A, B, and C are all going to be eliminated because they contain singular pronouns that do not agree with our plural pronoun, which is local residents. So again, through process of elimination here, which we just discussed, you're eliminating all singular answer choices, and your answer should be they call. Now, the English section is one that students often want to make more difficult or trickier than it actually is. Your instinct is going to be to find the best way to rewrite the sentence, but that's not what you should always be doing. You're selecting the best answer choices to improve the grammar in this sentence. And this is why it is often simpler to see what's happening in the answer choices before you go back to the actual sentence. All right, the next practice question of the day is going to focus on a math strategy, and this comes from the Princeton Reviews ACT practice test online. Now, quite frequently, both the SAT and the ACT are going to trip students up on the math section by making them do math when it isn't actually necessary. Okay, so let's take this first word problem about a rug. I'm going to read that. A rectangular rug has an area of 80 square feet, and its width is exactly 2 feet shorter than its length. What is the length in feet of the rug? So we're just asking to find the length of the rug. So firstly, it would be strange to know a rug's area and the relationship between its length and width without actually knowing what its length and width are. So don't get caught up on this, okay? Just simplify it. Start with a very simple formula for area of the rug. Okay, we all know that area equals length times width, so we know that length times width is going to equal 80. So we know that the formula is this, and even though you may be conditioned by high school math classes to make this a complex algebra problem, avoid that because that is going to be a trap. We are going to use the strategy which is called PITA, or plug in the answers. So you have a formula here and you have 5 possible answers since this is being pulled from the ACT math. One of the answers must be the length of the rug. So what we're going to do here is we're going to plug in those answers into the formula. Now, another strategy within a strategy is that we are going to start in the middle, and we're going to start with C. Okay, so the length or the answer choice is 16. So for C, 16 minus 2 is 14. So we know here if we just plug in the answer that our area is going to be 244. So what we know about this is that answer choice C is way too large and it is not the correct answer. So not only can we eliminate answer C, but because we started in the middle, we can also eliminate the larger options, which are D and E. So we have now taken this from 5 possible answer choices to 2 possible answer choices. All right, I'm just going to move back up in the opposite direction. We're going to plug it into B. 10 minus 2 equals 8. And so if we plug that into our formula, we will see that 10 times 8 equals 80. And therefore, our correct answer is going to be B. So just remember here in this example that the ACT test quite often makes complicated questions out of simple math, but using a strategy like PITA or plug in the answers can make those questions more simple again. All right, let's look at reading strategy. Okay, so you're going to notice here that there is not a question attached to this, and that is because giving a reading strategy means we don't have time to go over an entire passage together, okay? But what we want to do is we want to illustrate a fundamental reading strategy that we teach for both the SAT as well as the ACT. Now, you can always use process of elimination to rule out any answer choices that are wrong, and there are certain ways that reading questions are phrased that you should look out for. Now, of course, there's a lot more to breaking down reading comprehension questions than what we're going to talk about, but any answer choice that uses extreme language, like never or always or all, is probably going to be a wrong answer. Now, you should also be wary of answer choices that use phrases that come directly from the passage. Don't forget, the ACT wants to trick you. And when you identify an exact phrase from the passage in the answer choice, then you might actually think that that's the right answer. But in fact, it's usually a trap. Just because it's in the passage does not mean that it answers the question. All right, next, you should also rule out anything that could be true but isn't explicitly stated in the text. The ACT tells you that you do not need outside information to answer their reading questions. So if it isn't in the passage, then it simply cannot be a correct answer choice. And then the most important thing to remember about the reading section is that the answer that you want to see might not actually be there. Multiple choice answers are not a customizable feature, right? So you must select from what is on the rack. Now, you might not find the answer choice that you love, but it might still be the best answer, or what we would call the least bad answer. Okay, and that is likely going to be your correct answer on test questions on the SAT and the ACT. Okay, finally, let's wrap up these questions and let's take a look at a science question. Now, the ACT science section is going to present you with a ton of scientific information. You're going to see theoretical arguments, experiment results, and analysis of scientific phenomena. These are all big words, right? But for your final multiple choice section, you're going to get tons and an overwhelming amount of science-based material. But according to the ACT itself, you are still able to perform well on the science section, even if you have no background scientific knowledge. So when you see a question, so the entire question isn't listed here because we don't need all of the question for this specific example. But when you see a question begin in experiment 2, then what you're going to do is you're simply going to refer back to experiment 2 and table 2. So we don't have, again, we don't have this full passage because you don't need it, but with just the information in this chart, you will be able to find the right answer on a science question. You don't even need to know what's being tested in the lead and tin cubes from the example. You don't even know you don't necessarily need to know what it means when they say that the typical time was around 2 seconds. None of that is actually going to help you answer this specific question. So just read the chart and you're going to be able to find what the cube's measured period would most likely be nearest, because that is what the question is asking you to do. All right, I'm just going to highlight that because it is important. The range of the lead cube's measured period is between 2 and 2.12, as we see highlighted in the table. Now, we also know that the average measured period of the lead cube in experiment 2 is 2.06 seconds. So if another trial is conducted, then the measured period should be pretty close to that average measured period, and it should fit in the same range as each measurement for the lead cube in table 2. So B is going to be the only answer choice that actually fits both criteria. So we automatically know just by reading the table that our correct answer here, I'm sorry, it should be B. I have the wrong one highlighted. So the answer should be B. So there are many students who struggle with the ACT science section because they are science phobic and they begin to panic at the mention of scientific terms. Now, on the other hand, there are also excellent science students who struggle because the science terms themselves aren't what actually help you do well on the ACT science section. So you'll need to concretely identify what the question is asking, and then you're just going to find it within the information that is provided. All right, as we wrap up our session today, I'm going to talk about our final yet critically important strategy, and that is what you need to know to prepare for tests like the ACT. Now, the first thing that anybody should do, if you're not sure whether the ACT is right for you or not, is to take a practice test. Now, keep in mind that through our summer workshops, we're offering SAT, ACT, and PSAT practice tests. If you've not already registered for one, I'll give you the link so that you may do so and attend a practice exam. Now, you can take them anytime over the course of the summer. It doesn't have to be this weekend or next weekend, but this is going to give you a baseline of how you would perform on the real exam. Now, if you're to a further point, maybe you've already taken the ACT and you just want to prep for it, there are lots of other things that you can do. You can buy a prep book. You can just go to Amazon, or you may even have one available for you at your local high school that you can do prep on your own. If you like the idea of prep on your own, but you need something a little bit more structured than just a book, you may want to consider something that is called self-prep online. What that means is you have the materials, you just get to do it all at your own pace. The next two options are what many students go for when they're looking for a higher score, which is to either take a comprehensive course or work with a tutor. So no matter what you decide to do, you want to ensure that if you have a goal, that you are using some type of preparation to get that score that you're looking for. All right, we're wrapping up for the day. I want to remind you that you can use any of these strategies that we talked about to help improve your score on the ACT. We've talked about what the ACT is. We've talked about its role in the college admissions process. We've talked about general strategies as well as specific strategies that you could use to maneuver the ACT. So there are many more strategies that we offer, but my hope is that you've taken a few of these strategies today, and you can go ahead and get a jump start on prepping for this exam. And with that, we're going to wrap up the session today. I very much appreciate all of your participation, but there is time now for questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if we have any questions for the group. I'm going to go through those. We'll end our recording, and then I'm just going to hang out for a little bit longer in case anyone has some offline questions that you'd like to chat about. So if you have questions, feel free to pop those in the chat. If you're more comfortable unmuting yourself, you are welcome to do that too, to ask your question.
Nancy, I came in a little bit late, so Nancy, sorry, I came in a little bit late, so I'll wait for people to ask their questions and maybe as people log off, come back on just to ask you some questions you probably talked about in the beginning. Is that okay?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And you may have missed this, but I am also going to provide my slide deck and a recording of the session. So I am more than happy to answer your questions, but you will also have those resources if you'd like to go back and review the material again. All right, perfect. Thank you. Okay, now I have a question in the chat that I'd like to go through. Tests in school are usually psychologically sorted. First, the easy to warm up, then the harder. Is that similar for the SAT, ACT, or is everything randomized? So the SAT is another conversation that has recently changed to become a computer adaptive exam. So that is going to be different than it has ever been in the past. We have a digital SAT, PSAT strategy session. It's going to cover some of the same material, but also it's going to cover, specific strategies for the digital exams. So we can talk more about what scoring and questions look like for that one. But for the ACT, it's always been said that the questions tend to get harder as you go through the exam, but the truth is we teach something that is called personal order of difficulty. So just because ACT says these are easier or these are harder does not necessarily mean that that's going to be your personal order of difficulty. So I say all of this to say that as you're going through, I would recommend going from beginning to end through the exam and highlighting any questions that you're just not sure of. continue moving forward to try to get through every single question. And then with your remaining time, you're going to want to go back and you're going to want to answer the questions that you don't feel as confident with. So again, use your personal order of difficulty to answer the questions that you deem easiest first, and then let the rest follow. And then again, we can talk about SAT later because that has completely changed. But thank you for your question. One last question before I end the recording and dismiss the whole group. Is scientific calculator allowed? Do we need a scientific calculator, or is a normal calculator fine? So this is a good question. Thank you. Any standard or graphing calculator is permitted. You're not really going to need to use a lot of the scientific functions, but because there is algebra, geometry, and a bit of trigonometry, it might be useful to have a graphing calculator as opposed to just a normal calculator. And keep in mind, they also say that if you choose not to use a calculator, anything on the test is solvable without a calculator. I would not recommend showing up without one, but it is possible to do that. So you don't need any type of high-level calculator to answer these questions. Now, if you're not sure if your calculator is compatible, ACT actually has a page that you can go to where it tells you which devices are going to be acceptable as well as not allowed on the exam. All right, I am going to end this session to dismiss us. I am not kicking anyone out. I would love for you all to stay around and continue. I'm just going to go ahead and end recording here for the group. So again, thank you all very much for your questions. And we will end here.